My name is Kevin Robb, class of 1971, which means I arrived here 45 years ago. I am the Associate Vice President for Mission and Ministry. On odd days, I'm the Associate College Treasurer. I deal with the sublime and the ridiculous, and it varies day to day which is which. And I'm also privileged to be the chair of the Father Philip A. Smith OP Student Fellowship Program for Study and Service Abroad. The other members of the selection committee are Father Gabriel Pivarnik, sitting over here at the desk, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Theology and the director of the Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies. And the third member is Mr. Richard Lumley, who is one of our campus ministers charged with coordinating global service projects. Let me see if these people want. The Smith Fellowship Program was conceived in 2008. Father Joseph Guido, who's hiding in the back of the room, the Vice President for Mission and Ministry, was taking a shower one morning and had an idea. Ever since, whenever he says to us that he's had an idea in the shower, we cringe. He conceived this program, and it was a way, first of all, to honor Father Philip A. Smith, OP, the 11th president of Providence College, from 1994 until 2005, and who died suddenly following surgery in November of 2007. Kate Murray, who has a master's degree from the college, she and her husband, Thomas Murray, made the first donation to the fellowship program, a fellowship a year for the first 10 years. Since then, many members of the Board of Trustees have supported the program. One of them is here today. Emily Leary, she and her husband Bill have been supporting the program, one fellowship a year for the last 3 years. And then other trustees have been equally generous. Over 4 summers, we have sent 22 Providence College students to various places in the world. 2 in the first year, 2009. One of them is here now as an alumnus of the college, Elizabeth Weber Begley, sitting over by the bookcase. Elizabeth was a Pioneer Smith Fellow and spent 8 weeks, I think, at Oxford University with the Dominicans at Blackfriars Hall. And so 2 the first year, 5 the second year, 8 the third year, and 7 the fourth year. 22 in all. They've been to Blackfriars in England. They've been with the UN, Dominican NGO office in Geneva. 6 of them have been to our Dominican mission in Kisumu, Kenya, working at Our Lady of Grace School. A total of 5 have gone down under. 2 just to Sydney itself, 3 to Sydney, and then on to the Solomon Islands with Bishop Chris Cardone of the class of 1980, a Dominican of our province who went off as a young priest and never came back, and he quickly got a mitre. Now, since his usual garb, getting from island to island in his little power boat, is wearing cutoffs and a t-shirt, he looks pretty funny with his high Roman mitre. We've had students go to an orphanage in the Philippines. They have really been all over. 7 of them came back this summer. 5 of them will be presenting today. We had 2 go to Oxford, Laura Wells and Beatrice Forster. They won't be presenting today. We will have Emily Foster presenting on the Dominican NGO office in Geneva. We will have Joe Slattery and Emily Kaur presenting on their 6 weeks on the Australian continent, mostly in Sydney. They did go a little far afield, and Joe even a little farther. And then we will have Claire Carroll and Kayla McKernan, who went to Sydney for 10 days and then went on to the Solomon Islands for 4 weeks. And so now I'm very privileged to welcome Emily Foster to the microphone. Emily is one of the student leaders in our campus ministry and has the distinction of being, for the 3rd year now, the student member of the Board of Trustees Committee on Catholic and Dominican Mission. So, Emily?
Thank you very much, Father Rob. As Father Rob said, my name's Emily Foster. I'm a senior this year at Providence College and had the incredible opportunity to travel to Geneva, Switzerland for 4 weeks this past summer through the blessing of having received a Father Smith Fellowship. I began preparing for my Father Smith Fellowship about a year ago to date and knew that I wanted to travel somewhere in the world, but really had no idea where. And was very fortunate that Father Carlos Rodriguez, who is a coordinator for the Dominicans internationally, visited Providence College's campus last October. And through speaking about the different ways Dominicans are involved around the world, mentioned that there was a Dominican delegation to the United Nations. And immediately upon hearing about that, I was hooked and knew that that was something I was very, very interested in doing. So I was very lucky to be put in contact with Father Carlos, and he was able to put me in contact with the Dominican delegation to the United Nations. There are 2 Dominicans working in Geneva, Switzerland in a permanent delegation to the United Nations, Father Olivier, who is a permanent delegate and a Dominican friar, and then Evelyn von Steffens, who is a lay Dominican but also works very closely with the Dominican delegation to the United Nations. So I spent most of the year last year speaking to both Father Carlos, Father Olivier, and Evelyn, arranging my trip to Geneva, Switzerland. This was a new fellowship. No one from Providence College had ever visited the Dominican delegation in Geneva, so it was a little difficult coordinating all the details, but eventually I was very excited that everything fell together, and in June last summer I left for Geneva, Switzerland. Arriving in Geneva was absolutely incredible. I was greeted by Evelyn von Steffens, who, as I mentioned, is a lay Dominican working with the delegation, and she was able to give me a tour of Geneva, Switzerland, and dropped me off at where I was going to be staying and started to prepare me for beginning work with the Dominican delegation. I was very privileged to be staying in Home St. Pierre when I was in Geneva, Switzerland. This is a view of the Cathedral St. Pierre from my window. I have a number of different pictures of the cathedral that I took at nighttime, during the day, when there was a rainbow over it, when they had flags out. It was just, the view was absolutely incredible, and I was so blessed to actually be staying in the Old City area of Geneva. So I got to see the contrast between the more developed, industrialized section of Geneva where the United Nations and other NGO offices are, and then also get to see a little bit more of the history of the city in the Old City where I was staying. This is a view from the rooftop terrace of Home St. Pierre, just absolutely incredible views, and I was so blessed to have been able to stay there during my time in Geneva. And finally, just another view of the cathedral at night. So my work began with the Dominican delegation the Monday after I arrived in Geneva, Switzerland. On my first day, I met with both Father Olivier and Evelyn, and they told me right away that I was considered to be a member of the Dominican delegation while I was in Switzerland, which really surprised me, and I was very excited to hear. I knew that I would be working with the delegation while abroad, but had no idea that I would actually be considered a member of the delegation for the 4 weeks that I would be working with them. So they told me right away that everything I did, everything I said while I was in Geneva could be construed as a view of the Dominican delegation, so I had to be very careful about what exactly I was doing while I was over there, but I was absolutely honored to have been considered a member of the delegation while I was there. When we met that first morning, they informed me of a couple of the different goals of the Dominican delegation, and basically their main goal is promoting human rights. I was in Geneva at the time of the Human Rights Council, so it was very important that I was there to help them out throughout those couple weeks of the Human Rights Council. And they explained to me that the goal of the Dominican delegation was to influence different lawmaking processes of the United Nations in the way of the gospel without explicitly stating that that's what they were doing. It really reminded me of the saying, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. But what the delegation is doing is really trying to quietly influence different lawmaking processes and push the United Nations in the direction of human rights, but without explicitly saying that's what they were trying to do. They explained to me that I might be very surprised by a couple of the different groups that I saw the Dominican delegation working with, because they explained to me that if they found maybe a different NGO, non-governmental organization, or a different country that they maybe necessarily didn't always see eye to eye with, but were able to agree on one essential human rights issue, they would begin a partnership with that organization and perhaps pass legislation together or something along those lines, and explain to me how important it is to agree just on one issue and how that can be the start of a relationship and working together in the future, which I thought was very impressive. Now, during my time with the Dominican delegation, I had a couple different roles. As I mentioned, I was there during the Human Rights Council. So the most important role I had was attending the Human Rights Council every day. This is a view from the seat that I would sit in at the Human Rights Council every day. As I mentioned, the Dominican delegation is pretty small. There's only 2 people over in Geneva working with the United Nations, so I sort of served as a helping hand. I would go to the Human Rights Council meetings, take notes, and then report back to the delegation on what exactly had happened that morning and if there was anything I thought they should specifically take note of and maybe take action on. I also attended a number of different side events during lunchtime. We had about a 3-hour lunch every day, and there would be probably between 10 and 20 different panel discussions on a certain issue that different members of the Human Rights Council would put together. So they had side events focusing on the right to education, the right to health, and a number of other rights, and I would get to go to those side events as well and really take notes on those, report back to the delegation, and become a lot more informed on many of the things that the Human Rights Council was discussing during their meeting sessions. And finally, I began working on a Dominican database. The Dominican delegation explained to me that they serve as a little bit of a hub for Dominicans all around the world. So one of my main tasks was starting to put together a database of Dominicans all over the world. So if someone somewhere in the world had a question about human rights or a social justice issue, they could turn to this database and know exactly what Dominicans they could contact. So unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to finish that project because, as you can imagine, contacting all the Dominicans in the world is a little bit of a lengthy task. But I got to get started on that project and see how remarkable it is that the delegation is moving in that direction to put together a database of that sort. So my day-to-day work was very exciting because I was essentially autonomous when I was at the United Nations. I would meet with Father Olivier and Evelyn perhaps once or twice a week, but other than that was really on my own in terms of what I wanted to do during the day. So with the badge that I wore, I had free access to most of the United Nations. So I could go to the Human Rights Council, pop in on other meetings. I saw a couple films with discussions to follow those and different side events as well. It was really interesting to me that I was really given the ability to educate myself about the UN as much as I wanted to when I was there, and really enjoyed that the delegation was able to give me that freedom to sort of find things that I was interested in while I was there as well. So as I mentioned, I was working with the Human Rights Council, which is composed of 47 member states and a number of different non-governmental organizations as well. So at those meetings, I saw reports by special rapporteurs who are reporters who went to different countries or reported on specific issues, really to educate the member states about what's going on in the world. There were also member states having the opportunity to congratulate or condemn other member states for perhaps upholding human rights in their countries or maybe having things that they needed to work on a little bit for human rights. And also, as I mentioned, I was able to attend a number of different side events while I was at the United Nations. 2 that I really want to mention, one that I observed on religious tolerance and one that I observed on Haiti after the earthquake and the right to education. These were 2 side events that really stood out to me that I really, really enjoyed seeing. And as I said, I was there for 4 weeks, so I saw probably close to 20 side events, but these were the 2 that really stuck out to me the most. The one on religious tolerance was really interesting to me because it was a panel of religious leaders who were talking about their own religion and the ways that they thought we should promote religious tolerance in the world. Obviously, in the world right now, there's a number of different religious conflicts going on. And it was really interesting for me to be able to see a number of different religious leaders from different faith traditions all coming together and talking about how the main goal of religion is to promote tolerance and to promote acceptance, and how sad they were, in fact, by how many conflicts are going on around the world that are centralized around religion. They explained really how sometimes the positive aspects of religion are overlooked, and how they really want to try to focus in the next couple of years in the Human Rights Council about how important religious tolerance is and how positive religion can be if we let it, which I really enjoyed hearing. I thought it was a very positive message, and as Father Olivier had mentioned to me, I may have been surprised by a couple of different faith traditions that I saw represented at that panel, but really enjoyed that so many different people were able to come together with one common goal and one common message. The other side event that I really enjoyed attending was one focusing on Haiti after the earthquake, specifically on the right to education. The most striking part of that side event was that there was a young woman who was a Haitian native and was actually in Haiti at the time of the earthquake. And she spoke to the fact that she found it very significant that after the earthquake, the nuns who ran her school wasted absolutely no time in setting up a school in a warehouse so that her schooling wasn't interrupted. And she thought it was very, very significant that the nuns valued her education so much that they were really willing to go above and beyond to set up a school somewhere else for her and her fellow classmates so that their education could continue. And after having that experience, she spoke about how important she now sees her education as being, and how she hopes to work in the future with the UN and with other NGOs in order to promote the right to education for other people, because she saw it so significant that her education was not interrupted by such a horrific event. So the end of my time at the Human Rights Council brought forth a number of resolutions that different NGOs and different states proposed. There were 23 resolutions total that the Human Rights Council voted on, including human trafficking, the right to education, elimination of discrimination against women, and then situations in different countries around the world. The end of the Human Rights Council was slightly disheartening for me because all of the resolutions that were proposed passed. And I wondered why, if there's so many things happening in the world, why aren't these resolutions stronger? Why aren't we debating more? And why isn't there conflict over whether all these resolutions are passing? Because it seemed like, although I saw conflicts over the 3 weeks I was at the Human Rights Council, everything sort of passed, most of them unanimously, some of them with a vote, but all did eventually end up passing. This is something that I had the opportunity to speak to the delegation about following the conclusion of the Human Rights Council, and they were able to explain to me, first of all, that the Human Rights Council is a very new body. So everything that I'm seeing happening is sort of setting precedent as they're going, and there's not really sort of any specific structure in line quite yet for how these resolutions are going to happen. And they also explained to me how long-term the Human Rights Council is looking, how things that I was seeing happening at the Human Rights Council when I was there had been started planning for years beforehand, and that the Human Rights Council now is just planting the seeds for future development and future promotion of human rights. So I was there for only 4 weeks and saw a very, very small piece of what's happening in a very big picture looking body, which I was very reassured by, because as I said, I was surprised by the fact that maybe some more concrete action wasn't being taken. So one of my goals looking forward is to really continue following the Human Rights Council and seeing the different goals and different resolutions that were put into place when I was there coming to fruition in the future, because I think it's going to be very interesting to see where this body goes as it moves forward in the future. Another remarkable aspect of my time in Geneva, Switzerland, was meeting Dominicans from all over the world. The only context that I've ever interacted with Dominican friars in is at Providence College and in a classroom setting. So it was very interesting for me to have the chance to meet Dominicans from all over the world and hear about the different ways that they're sort of reaching their goal as members of the Order of Preachers. And these are 2 Dominicans that I had the opportunity to meet the first week I was in Geneva, Switzerland. In the middle is Father Carlos, who I mentioned is the Dominican who came to Providence College last October and first introduced me to this fellowship. He explained to me that he's basically a matchmaker of the Dominican order. He travels around the world putting different Dominicans in contact with each other and doing basically what he did for me, putting students in contact with the Dominican order. He had a very interesting definition of human rights, which I wanted to share to you. He defined human rights as respecting the dignity in each person and providing each person with the resources they need to survive. I thought how remarkable it is that this man who's traveled all around the world and has seen so much hardship still has such a high view of human rights and such an incredible definition of human rights, basically just providing each individual person with what they need. And I really enjoyed hearing that from him and learning about the different ways that he's traveling around the world to try to promote this idea of human rights that he has. The second Dominican I met was Sister Anne. Sister Anne works in a prison in France as a nurse. She went through school and gained her nursing degree and then decided to enter the Dominican order. But in her role as the prison, she doesn't really serve as a Dominican chaplain or anything like that. She really is just a nurse in the prison. And I thought it was very interesting the way she explained to me she tries to influence the women in the prison that she's working with through her actions and through leading them by example and providing them with a positive role model. And I thought that was a very different way that I've ever seen the idea of the order of preachers carried out, preaching through her actions and not necessarily teaching in a classroom as I've seen Dominicans here do, but really enjoyed hearing about the different way that she saw her role as a member of the order of preachers and how positive a role and role model view she saw she could have on these women. Finally, I just want to share a couple different things that I did for fun when I was in Geneva, because I had an incredible time working, but then also had a wonderful time meeting the intern community in Switzerland and traveling around Switzerland. One of the most remarkable things I found about the UN intern community, there are hundreds of different UN interns in Geneva for the summer, and I was really surprised by the fact that many of them didn't know who the Dominican friars were. I explained that I was working with the Dominican delegation, and I got, oh, you're from the Dominican Republic, are you a priest, what are you doing here? So I really enjoyed having the opportunity to serve as sort of a delegate, as I saw, of the Dominican order and explaining to a younger intern community what the Dominicans are, the role they have in my life here at Providence College, and was really proud of the fact that I was able to share so much about the Dominican heritage and sort of the story of St. Dominic and what brought the Dominicans to the United States and at Providence College, and really, really enjoyed that I was able to share with a younger crowd sort of the Dominican order. I also had the opportunity to see a number of different music festivals in Geneva. It's a very lively city, so we got to travel around and listen to different music. The Euro Cup was also going on when I was abroad, so it was really interesting. As I said, there's so many different interns from all over the world, and obviously people were supporting their own countries in the Euro Cup. So I was able to watch different soccer games with students who were from the countries that were actually playing in these games, which was really interesting for me. I also had the opportunity to travel to Annecy, France. I did a day trip with a couple of friends. It was an absolutely beautiful city. I also was able to find in Geneva, Switzerland, an English-speaking mass. I should have mentioned earlier in my presentation that the language of Geneva is French, and I don't speak a single word of French. So obviously at times this was a little bit difficult for me, but I didn't find the language barrier to be very crippling. It was nice, however, to find an English-speaking mass in Geneva and to have the opportunity to at least once a week be completely surrounded by people who speak English and to really see the lively community of the parish. They had a little coffee brunch-in after every Sunday Mass, and it was nice to get to speak to the people in the parish and find out how they had come to Geneva, and some of them were involved in the United Nations, so to explain to them the work I was doing there as well. I also climbed a mountain while I was in Geneva, Switzerland. A couple of friends asked me one morning if I wanted to go for a hike, and I figured, sure, I'll go for a quick hike, and it was actually a really, really long hike, about 4 hours up to the top of this mountain, and I was very impressed with myself that I made it to the top, and this is just a picture of the view from the top. It was absolutely incredible. And finally, I was able to visit Montreux, Switzerland as well, which is a beautiful city. We got to see a castle while we were there and just see some of the beautiful sights and mountains of Switzerland. The last interesting thing I did was visit CERN, which is a power plant in Geneva, Switzerland. I don't know if any of you stayed up on sort of developments over the summer, but while I was in Switzerland, CERN released a new particle that they were calling the God particle. And really, to be honest, I don't completely understand the science behind it, but it's a particle accelerator, and they're doing a lot of research on different particles and the formation of particles. And it was really interesting that I was in Switzerland when CERN had released this new particle. So the interns at CERN actually set up an opportunity for the United Nations interns to go to CERN and to learn a little bit about the particle accelerator and the detector and the different work that was being done at CERN. The research was very interesting. And finally, I had a chance to visit the priory where Father Olivier lives, and a number of other different Dominicans live in Geneva, Switzerland, which was very nice to get to talk to them and hear a little bit about their stories as well. Just a couple of different pictures from my time abroad. So in conclusion, I'm sure, as you can see, I had an absolutely incredible time in Geneva, Switzerland. I was able to learn about the United Nations and also really enjoyed learning about different Dominicans around the world and the different ways that the Dominican friars are able to interact with the public sector. So I want to say thank you so much to everyone here at Providence College who made this possible for me, all the donors, and I look forward to staying up on the United Nations in the future and hopefully continuing the relationship between Providence College and the Dominican delegation abroad so that more students can travel and have this experience in the future. Thank you. Okay.
We will have time for questions of all the presenters at the end, but I'd like to keep moving along. Next, I'd like to welcome to the microphone Emily Kaur and Joe Slattery. They went to Sydney, Australia, and other places in Australia, working primarily with the Dominican Sisters of Eastern Australia and the Solomon Islands. They will tell you about their work. Joe wants to be a doctor. He's graduating in May, getting married in June, and then going off to medical school. As you see him now, he is dressed more formally than he ever is. No matter the weather, he tends to be in, you know, those little rubber shower shoes, whatever you call them, you know, shorts and a t-shirt. Emily is always very nicely dressed. So I'd ask them to come to the microphone now.
Yeah, as Joe said, my name's Emily. I'm a senior. I'm a social science major and a theology minor, and I am very interested in education and pastoral ministry, so that's what I chose to focus on during our time in Sydney with the Dominican Sisters. And then right after that, we pretty much jumped right into service. So as I said, I focused a lot on education. And so during my time in Sydney, I spent it working at Santa Sabina College, which is a K-12 Catholic and Dominican day school for girls. We lived in Strathfield, which is just outside of Sydney, and every morning I would walk to school with my homestay sister, who was a senior, and I basically helped out in the religion, history, and geography classes. And then while I was there, I also helped plan a retreat for the juniors at the school. It was just an incredible opportunity to both shadow the teachers and teach and get to know Australian culture through the girls. It was great to play, I guess, middle ground between the two. I would have morning tea with the teachers in the teachers' lounge, but then lunch in the courtyard with the girls, and everything there was just very eye-opening and really gave me a lot of direction when deciding what I want to do after school.
So first weekend there, what was really nice about the trip
That same weekend, we also had the great opportunity to see the most, I guess, iconic images of Sydney, the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. And that was just incredible. We literally went into the Opera House and had a tour, and it's one of those things, it's so much bigger and magnificent when you see it in person. And our homestay families were so gracious, and they took us to all these sites.
So a little bit of my service, never really did the same thing twice. Got to do a lot of different things. So up in the corner, that's a Dominican sister from Malta. She ran a nursing home out in the country. So I worked with her for the day, just kind of walking around, learning about the place, talking to the residents, helping out the nurse, cleaning up the meds and everything. And then down in the corner, other corner, we've got these Aboriginal women who Aboriginal people in Australia, some are a little bit disadvantaged. They didn't even get like citizenship or recognized until very recently. I think it was 20 years ago or so. And so they still have a lot of struggles, high crime rates, drug abuse, things like that. So these women were very instrumental because they decided to take it upon themselves to form this group and then do what they could for their own community. So kind of nice because they know the troubles and they know how best to fix them. And then the sisters in the back there, behind the lady in the blue, his sister Rosemary Kinney, and she works with them with another sister to really help out in the best way that they can. So I got to sit in on their meeting a little bit, give a little bit of an outsider's perspective. I helped them kind of get their website going and their all set up. So it was really inspirational to work with the Aboriginal people.
There was one day about 2 weeks in where we visited the University of Sydney and University of Technology Sydney, and we met a Dominican friar there named Father Paul Rouse. And it was our first interaction with a friar, not a sister, and it was a wonderful day. We went to Mass at the Rosary, and then he took us to the JP2 Student Center, which is basically their version of campus ministry. And I think I speak for Joe when I say we were completely transported back to PC, and the feeling that we always have when we walk into the chapel basement here. You know, students were running in, throwing their book bags down, rummaging through the fridge, talking politics, talking nonsense, playing pool on the computer, reading books. And it was just a really great sense of community that really just reminded me of everything I love about PC, and really reminded me of why I was doing the fellowship, and that I may have been on the other side of the world, but that special charisma of Catholic and Dominican culture is present everywhere you go.
Yeah, it was also really cool because one of the previous fellows went to Sydney as well and actually worked at this chaplaincy for the 6 weeks. So there were a lot of people there that recognized her or knew her while she was there, and so we kind of made that connection, came full circle with it, kind of continued that universal family that had been established. So once again, we had our weekend off. For actually the first 3 weeks that we were there, it poured every day, so that was hard. But finally, we had this weekend where it was sunny, and Em and I actually went on our own this time. Just took the train into the city, walked over the harbor bridge, kind of around this harbor all the way to the Opera House on the other side, and farther to the Botanical Garden. So it was really nice that her and I got to kind of do some sightseeing and do a little bit touristy that day, and have the capacity to kind of go and do that stuff, to see some sights, see kind of planets and everything.
So during my time in Sydney, I said I worked at Santa Sabina, but I also spent a lot of time at St. Lucy's School, which is elementary school for children with disabilities. And Joe and I went there together on the first day, and I'm sure he has a great story that he'd like to share.
Yeah, so I got thrown into the 5th and 6th equivalent grades. We're not all the same age and everything. And so St. Lucy's, they take care of the disabled children, teach them and everything. And so a lot of times it's not about, as Mark
Yeah, and after that first day, I went back about 6 more times to help out in different grade levels and ages. And every single time I was blown away because I was jumping between there and Santa, and the difference was incredible. I would go to Santa, and the kids would pick up on my accent, and right away the questions would start. Do you have yellow school buses? Where are you from? Oh, you're from New York City. You must know celebrities. And but when I would go to St. Lucy's, the children would never pick up on the accent, but it didn't stop them from sitting on my lap or playing with my hair, or I was a new buddy to play with on the playground, or someone to help them get out of class. And so that really struck me. It was very moving that these students didn't see me as any different from anyone else, and it was very humbling and a good reminder of why we were doing the work we're doing.
So Emily got to go to St. Lucy's and do Santa, so I was just going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff I did. I worked with Dominicans in some other places, did something called Men's Shed, where the Dominican actually brother there works with older men to kind of give them a community and support system. We worked in the woodworking shop that day, just kind of putting things together, just kind of a community for the men so that they, most of them are widowed or getting on in age, and so it's somewhere where they can go to feel like they belong. It's kind of the government funded and stuff, and kind of tries to take care of them that way. I did a lot more with the healthcare. I worked at, or I went for a day to the Catherine Sullivan Center, which was a school for students with hearing impairments. And so just worked with local kids, kind of ran around with them, doing the various things you do with the school. Often I would talk to nurses and doctors and things in hospitals, just about the healthcare system. They always wanted to kind of talk about what's going on here and then compare it to what Australia's system is. And so it was really informative to have these conversations. It's something that definitely brought back with me, just kind of another perspective on how Australia's universal healthcare works, and just kind of a new, fresh way of looking at how our system works.
So during week 4, Joe and I split up. I stayed in Sydney, and I worked with Santa, and we went on the retreat that I mentioned earlier. So we went out to the bush, which is their version of the wilderness, and we had a 3-day retreat with the year 11 students. And the theme of the retreat was Be Still and Know That I Am God. And it was really a discernment retreat for these students to figure out who they are, how they come to have the relationships they do with the people in their lives, and then applying these all to what they shall pursue after high school. And I mean, I'm sure they got a lot of it, but I think I might have gotten just as much out of it. It really gave me a lot of direction. I went into the fellowship thinking that maybe I want to be a teacher or a journalist, and I came out deciding that I would love to pursue pastoral ministry after college. So yeah, it was very beneficial for me and great. Again, I got to lead the retreat and kind of participate on it at the same time.
So while Emily's leading this retreat, I got the opportunity. So while Emily was on her retreat, I got the opportunity to go down actually to Melbourne, and visit the Dominican Priory there. So that is like the Priory on campus. It's where took us to these matches to see kind of that side of the country because it is a big part of the culture. And so we got to go to, this was the state of origin game, which is pretty much equivalent to our kind of Super Bowl. And so it was really neat to get out in the community, to be with, I think there were 80,000 fans in that stadium. We broke some kind of world record because everyone was wearing a wig or something. But it was a really cool opportunity to see that side of the Australian culture.
For our 5th week, we traveled down to Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, and we went in without a major plan, and it wound up being one of the most, at least for myself, probably my favorite week of the entire fellowship. We went down to Australian Catholic University. We met with the campus minister there, and his name was Nick. And we met with him, and we told him what we were interested in, that we were both really involved in campus ministry here at PC. And he said, oh, let me take you back to the diocese office, and you can meet the youth leadership team. And we completely hit it off with them and helped them plan for their youth forum that they were going to have that coming weekend. And again, I know I had the same exact feeling that I do when I work here in campus ministry. Just lots of laughs, but lots of good work, and lots of time for reflection. And it was also a great opportunity to see, we got to go to Parliament House and go into the chambers and watch some debates, which was very exciting.
Yeah, I think Canberra was really unique in that a lot of the Australians in Sydney and even the ones I met in Melbourne were kind of saying we're not going to have any fun in Canberra. It's a planned city, there's nothing there, or whatever. But like Em said, I think it was one of my favorite weeks. That was really testament to the people that we met and lived with. I stayed with Liam, the tall guy next to Em, and we watched different movies every night. We went out to see a movie, we went out to dinner. We all kind of met up, had really great conversation, especially about Catholicism, the universality of it, and kind of what they do in a culture that most would argue is a little more secularized than ours. So we had a really good dialogue about that. But really, to be with the young Catholics that are really the youth leaders there, so they're really pushing their faith and real inspiration to me.
So we also had a chance to fly up to the Great Barrier Reef while we were in Australia, and we had a blast. So we spent a weekend up there. The first day we went on a jungle tour. We hopped on a bus, and we had a tour guide named Cousin Rohan, and he was hilarious and took us through the Daintree Rainforest, which is the oldest rainforest in the world, I believe. And we got to see rivers and waterfalls and lakes like I've never even imagined. And we got to swim and eat food and meet people from all over the world. It was just an incredible day. It was completely surreal.
So that was Friday, and then Saturday, you're in Australia, you got to make it to the Great Barrier Reef, and so that one picture in the corner is from Green Island. We went out about, 50 or so miles off the coast to Green Island, where we got the opportunity to go snorkeling. So it's, you picture all the bright coral and the bright fish and everything that you see in pictures all the time. But it really is totally different when you're actually snorkeling. You get to follow that fish, or you really freak out because you got this big snake thing under you, and then you try and breathe in and realize you're underwater, and you have to look. It's just not good. But it was really a lot of fun to get away. Again, get up north where it was finally warm. It's winter there, and down in the city it's pretty cold. But we got a little bit of a break up there, and I forgot our sunscreen, so we got baked. But nonetheless, a really fun weekend. Really blessed to have Emily, who we're friends here at school, so it was really nice to hang away with her.
For our last 3 days, we went up to Newcastle, which happens to be the largest coal port in the world, and we met with a Dominican sister, Sister Diana, who runs a refugee ministry in Newcastle. called Panola House. And so we went to work with her there one day, and it was incredible to see what the Dominican sisters are offering to people that really are trying to settle into new life in Australia from underprivileged backgrounds, mostly families moving there from Africa and other locations. But it was a great day to meet lots of people, hear lots of stories, play with the kids while the moms were in budgeting class, and I helped a woman study for her citizenship exam, and we helped a few women take the practice for their driving exam, for their permits, and just a great way to give back. And just as a final note, these are our homestay families, and I know I can say that without them, this would not have been the same experience. They really went out of their way to really take us in and make us feel a part of the family. I know I don't have any sisters myself, and I've always wanted that. And I stayed with 4 sisters, and it was just incredible. I would come home from work, and they'd be like, "Emily, how's your day?" And they'd always say, "Oh, Mom's making dinner." They never said, "Our mom's making dinner." And just those little differences, little things made all the difference in the world. I never felt homesick at all. The biggest challenge wound up being trying to accept this hospitality. I kept thinking, I'm on a service trip. I'm supposed to be helping people, and people keep helping me. This isn't fair. This isn't right. And so that turned out to be the biggest lesson that I learned, was how to accept hospitality.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think the trip would have been the same without being able to stay with the Australian families. You really are able to immerse yourself in the culture a lot more. I mean, like I said, you come home and you're still, with Australians. You'll have dinner. They love to cook me the Australian authentic meal. It was funny because your girls would always be like, "Mom, you never make this stuff." So that was cool. And then, we'd have conversations at dinner. We talk about politics all the time, and this or that, and really an opportunity to further kind of an education about what the country is about.
And finally, this is Sister Rosemary Kinney, and she was our primary contact when we were planning the fellowship, and she's basically the one that made this all happen, and she's absolutely wonderful. She's so resilient. You can actually see she's in a sling in this picture, because this is on our way to the airport to come home, and 2 days before, she fell on the sidewalk and broke her shoulder. But as we were leaving, she's like, "Oh, it could be so much worse. At least I didn't break my glasses. I get to read still." It was just her way of thinking about things was so inspiring, and we couldn't have had a better mentor during our 6 weeks there. And well, thank you for listening, and thank you again. I can't even put into words how incredible this opportunity was, but on behalf of Joe and myself, thank you for listening.
Yes, I'd like to say something about Sister Rosemary Kinney, who sort of took to the Smith Fellowship program like a duck takes to water. She hosted our first Smith Fellow in the summer of 2011, Annie Wendell, and when it came to 2012, since she spent years in the Solomon Islands also, she literally took, the concept and turned it into reality, healthcare and education tracks in 2 different locations, Sydney and in the Solomons. A remarkable woman, a very committed Dominican, and one, you couldn't ask for a better partner halfway around the world for a program such as this. I want to welcome now to the microphone our 2 Solomon Islanders. We have Claire Carroll, who has the distinction of being the younger sister of one of our first Smith Fellows in Kenya. Her older sister Patricia went to Kenya, one of 2 Smith Fellows, opened that up in 2010. And Kayla McKernan, who has the distinction of the first Smith Fellow to have a baby named after her. She was in the delivery room in the Solomon Islands, and a baby arrived a bit too quickly for the midwife. The doctor didn't even get there, and Kayla was there, and the mother named the baby after Kayla. So, ladies.
waru marahuka ana hutaikia ana tomatoha ira na aporoa dore na ini ara mato na sieta oru aru ia kato mato eto ana to tora ho arere mato are na u arere mato are na u kuairi are are
And I'm Kayla McKernan. I'm a senior here at Providence College. I'm a psychology major with a pre-health track, and I was focused on healthcare in my travels. So basically, our mission, like everyone else's, was to immerse ourselves in the Catholic and Dominican community in Sydney, Australia, and the Solomon Islands. And Claire, like she said, was focused on education, and I was primarily focused on learning about the healthcare system. So before we arrived in Sydney, Claire and I wanted to plan a little excursion for our own. And we visited tropical North Queensland and Cairns in Australia. We went similar to the Daintree rainforest. We went near there and we did jungle surfing. We did some night hikes with a tour guide who looked like Steve Irwin. And we also got the chance to scuba dive.
Our homestay families, just like Joe and Emily, were so gracious, and it was great to be a part of their lifestyles for the 2 weeks that we spent with them. We went along with their normal daily activities, and it was a great way to see the city and what a normal day is like.
And we also got the chance to travel on little vacations with our homestay families, who were also friends with Emily and Joe's homestay family. So everyone knew each other. I got the chance to go to Gerringong, which is a beach surf town, and the family owned a house that was right on the beach, so that was wonderful. And Claire got a chance to go skiing.
Yes, I went skiing with the family for a couple of days, and a lot of people were confused as to why I would travel to Australia to go skiing. But when I explained my situation, they understood. But it was a lot of fun to be with them.
And so we'll go quickly through this part because we spent time with Sister Rosemary Kinney, similar to Emily and Joe. We did the same things as they were doing, we only had 10 days there. So we got to travel to Canberra as well and meet with Sister Rosemary, do a few activities, and they were there to kind of guide us and try and prepare us as much as they could for the Solomon Islands, but I don't think anything could have prepared us besides just going.
So our first stop was Tenerife in Guadalcanal, and we got out of the plane, and we were told that Sister Katie would be there to meet us, but that a lot of times plans don't go accordingly. And so we sat outside the airport for a little while before we were picked up by Sister Katie, and we went right to their home. We only had a couple of days there, but it was a great way to transition in, just get to know kind of a little bit of what the culture is like. We helped in Sister Katie's clinic, which was right across the road from her house, and the cases there are a lot different from what we experience here. A woman was having a wound cared for, a coconut had fallen on her, someone else, while they were working in their garden, was cut with a machete. So a lot of different things, but it was immediately definitely a change of culture.
And I don't think we could ever accurately describe Sister Katie, but when Claire and I were waiting outside the airport, I started to panic. We didn't know who exactly was going to pick us up until we saw a woman hanging out of the side of a truck, waving her arms with her habit on, and I said, I think that's Our Lady. So luckily it was her. There weren't too many nuns around. So she's very interesting, and she likes to take her time in the clinic. And this poor woman with the coconut wound, I thought she was going to pass out, but Sister Katie proceeded to take us on a tour of the one-room clinic and show us each medicine in each bottle. And I was like, we need to hurry up.
So after Tenerife, we moved on to Visale, and we stayed with Sister Vero, who is such a dynamic woman. She plays an integral role in the school there. She's one of the principals and a teacher as well, but the students really look up to her and appreciate all the work she does. But Visale is right on the water, and it's absolutely paradise there. And I was able to help out in the school, and originally I was going to aid in the English classes, but I was speaking to one of the members of the faculty, and they told me about a room that had a lot of boxes of donated books, primarily from Australia, and that they had been sitting there for a long time because no one knew how to organize them, and the students still weren't able to make use of the books. So I kind of made it my project to create a library at the school, and I employed the help of Kayla, whether she wanted to help or not, a lot of the students and also the faculty. So it was wonderful because the entire community helped create the library. We dusted off the books. The room was pretty dirty, rat droppings everywhere, not much equipment. So I was able to get some supplies and organize the library, and I was very happy to hear on my way home that all of the classes now had a library period, and they were using the space to study and as a spot during the day for the students to do work. So it was great to feel like I kind of had a lasting impact there, and hopefully people to come will be able to go and make sure the kids are still trying to read. English is their third language. Every village has its own language, and then they speak Pidgin English, and then they speak English. So it's very important for them to have resources to read and practice if they want to try to have opportunities in other countries or just get a better education. It's very critical for them to have English.
And so while Claire worked in the school each day, I walked about 1 minute down the road to a clinic right on the beach, right by the water. And the nurses there taught me some basics, and I was in charge of pretty much writing down their names and histories and taking a few blood pressures because diabetes is a huge problem there. So I was just helping patients control that and just bandaging wounds and just following the nurses. And probably the most interesting thing that I saw was a little boy who was just patiently waiting outside, and I noticed he'd been waiting for about 2 hours. So I asked the nurse if he could take him in, and she was like, "Oh, sure, fine." So we took him in. He had a fishing hook just stuck in his foot, and he was just going to sit there for probably 5 more hours. So I took a picture of it, but I didn't put it in the PowerPoint. The one day after the clinic, a few of the village boys and Claire came by the clinic and were like, "Let's go on a hike, let's go." So I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And similar to Emily, I wasn't quite prepared for the hike because where we're staying, there's a huge mountain in the background. I always looked up, "Oh, that's so pretty, that's so beautiful." Didn't know that was the mountain that we were climbing. And so, needless to say, 2 hours of steep climbing in mud and hanging onto rocks. I actually fell off. They picked me up. It was terrifying. We made it to the top, and then I realized I had to go back down and was debating about trying to get a helicopter to lift me off, but it didn't work. And after sliding down the entire way, telling everyone I was doing it on purpose, the village boys were just laughing at me. I think I ruined Americans' reputation just for now, but I hope I recovered after that. And I think it was that night, Claire and I were sitting in our room, and we were sitting on the floor and trying to type in our blogs or write in our journals, and there was this shaking, and Sister Veronica, the nun we were staying with, had just went outside. And so I was like, "Claire, it's so rude. We're trying to sleep. Sister Veronica is knocking on the house and banging." And she was like, "Kayla, I don't think that's her. I think it's an earthquake." And so I threw everything across the room. We ran outside, which probably was not a smart idea. And needless to say, it was a 6.6 on the Richter scale. And it went on for about a minute, but no one was hurt. So it was a great experience after the fact.
And just one other thing about Visale, it was great because we became part of the village. We were only there for 4 days, but Sister Veronica was related to a lot of people who lived there. And when we went on the hike up the mountain, we found out afterwards that everyone in the village had gathered on the road because they could see the trail going up and watched us. So we were like some great entertainment that they hadn't had in a while. So after Visale, we went to Auki, where we spent 3 weeks. We took a ferry there. It was on the islands of Malaita, and we had previously been on Guadalcanal. And we stayed with Sister Loretta and Sister Matilda, who lived right next door to Bishop Chris Cardone, who graduated from Providence, and his brother was actually one of my teachers in high school. So it was incredible, all the connections that I had to this tiny island all the way on the other side of the world. But Bishop Chris is incredible. He's a father figure to so many boys and girls there, and the work he does, he handles it so well, and he's really a native now. But while I was in Auki, I taught English at Allegegio School, which was right across the road, and Sister Loretta also worked there. So in the morning, we would wake up to the roosters and go to morning mass, and then prepare a small breakfast. We'd usually pick some papayas from the tree right outside, so we'd have something to eat, and then we would walk to school. And I taught Form 4, so it's students in the range of 16 to 18 years old, and they have been taking English for a few years already, so they could usually understand everything I was saying. It was a little more difficult for them to form sentences. But it was great to have exposure to so many people there because I got to form so many relationships. And I'm not sure how much they learned from me, but I definitely learned from them while I was teaching. And it was great while I was there. It fell at a time where there was a speech contest sponsored by the United Nations. and the UN had set out about 8 different categories that the students could choose from. It varied from poverty to maternal health. So 8 students prepared speeches, and it was great to see them develop their own ideas and deliver it in their 3rd language. And as a culture, they are very shy, and so this was amazing for them to speak in front of their peers and people from the United Nations who had come out. And it was fun also because I got to work one-on-one with them.
And so my time in Alki was primarily spent at Kalufi Hospital. That was about 2 miles down the road from where we were staying with Bishop Chris and the sisters. And I was lucky enough to spend all my time there and go anytime I want. And there are 3 doctors on the whole entire island, and one of them is named Dr. Solomon, which I found very funny, but no one else thought it was funny. And there's two other male doctors, Dr. Joe and Dr. Jason. So they took me in as their student, and I was treated so nicely. And I primarily work with Dr. Solomon, and she's 30 years old and probably the most successful and driven woman on the island. And so I worked with her in the maternity ward and the children's ward, and we would do rounds every morning. And then on Tuesday and Thursday was operating theater day, so I would go in and observe surgeries, and those could last anywhere from 9 in the morning until 9 at night. So I was there a lot of the time. And so, like Father Rob said, I had a couple special deliveries happen in the Solomon Islands. The first one I'll talk about was the more surprising one. It was my first day at Kalufi Hospital, so I was a little nervous, just trying to find my way around. Not that it was that big. And I was standing in the maternity ward, and I asked Dr. Solomon, do you think I'll be able to see a delivery while I'm here? She said, oh, of course, there's probably someone in labor right now. So she went and checked the rooms, and there was. So she was like, you can just stand here, I'm gonna go do some things. So I was staying in the delivery room, and I was just kind of like standing there, trying to make sure the woman was okay, and the midwife was like, oh, I have to get something, I'll be right back. So the woman was not supposed to give birth in the next hour, but she did, and I was the only one in the room, and as soon as I screamed for the nurse to come back, the baby was coming, and we both somehow got the baby, and then it was named after me, the poor baby. And I didn't have internet access that often or to talk to my family, so I had emailed my mom once, you have a grandchild in the Solomon Islands, and logged off the computer. Get an email back, what? I don't understand. Anyway, she found out later. But that was the first special delivery. And the second special delivery was when I was working in the children's ward. There were 2 children, Alec and Rebecca, and they both had broken legs and had been laid out in the hospital for about 6 weeks just because they didn't have crutches. They had their casts on, they had everything, they just couldn't leave the hospital to go home. So one day I was saying, how can we get crutches here? They say they have to ship them from the capital, but the capital isn't responding to us. No one has supplies. So I was thinking, how can we make crutches? It can't be that hard. So I took their measurements. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I went back to Bishop Chris, and I told him about it, and he told me to ask the builder that lived on the compound that built the chapel. He's an extremely talented man. And I gave him a picture of the crutches that I drew, and he was like, oh, okay, I can do this. So within 2 hours that afternoon, he had made these crutches out of timber and stained them. They were beautiful, and they were perfect size. So that Sunday after Mass, we went with the whole group of Alki Parish and delivered the crutches to the kids who went home the next day. So that was incredible to see them leave the hospital just because they were a victim of circumstance. And here's a picture of the baby, Kayla, and the picture of the crutches here.
So it was great. On the weekends, we got to spend time with the young men and women who hung out around the bishop and the nun's house. Some of them doubled as my students, but one day we went to this beautiful beach and we had a picnic to celebrate St. Dominic's Day, and there was snorkeling there. We played soccer on the beach, and the girls taught us their village dance, and Kayla and I were having so much fun. And that evening, the school that I taught at was a boarding school, so on Saturday nights, they would have entertainment for the students. And the theme of the night was Village Dance Night. So we found out when we got there that we would be performing with the students. So we could have been standing there, standing still, not making any noise, just breathing, and they would have thought it was hilarious. So the fact that we were dancing around with everyone, they really enjoyed. And that helped in the classroom setting a lot, because I think they were a little bit intimidated having a teacher from America there. So they definitely opened up a lot and were more raising their hands a lot. I forgot to mention before, in the classrooms, most classes, there's only one textbook for the entire class of about 40 students. And so I would usually have the textbook, so I got very good at writing on the chalkboards. But despite not having the technology and all of that we are very fortunate to have at Providence, you could see those students who were very excited about learning, and they had so many goals. And it was great for me to see, and it was inspiring for me to come back to my classes here, because I have so many resources right in front of me, and it's way more difficult for them to get their hands on the things that will help them succeed in the future.
So just to kind of conclude our presentation, to talk about how we really enjoyed this fellowship. It's so hard to put into words, because this was easily the best time of my entire life and probably will be. And I think that what made the trip for me was just learning from the Solomon Islanders and being accepted into the homes of all the Dominican sisters. Sister Loretta and Sister Matilda were easily two of my best friends and still are. Sister Loretta is the most hilarious woman I've ever met. The way she would dodge Bishop Chris to try and not work when she was home from school. She actually would do a lap around the house. And one time Bishop Chris caught her when he was dumping out the garbage in the woods, and she was like, "Hi." So she's hilarious. And she also protected us from the rats at night that would come around the house. She slept on the floor the entire time we were there. And I just learned so much from them, and the kids still email me today, and Bishop Chris actually translates for me because I can't really type, so I get an email maybe once a week from one of the boys there saying translated by Bishop Chris. And it's just very nice to still be in touch with them, and to get emails from the doctors when they're in the operating room saying, "We miss you." And so it's definitely affected me for the rest of my life. And like one of the brothers said when we were visiting, he said that the Solomon Islanders only have three things: their family, their community, and their faith. And that was certainly the only things we had there. And it has allowed us to bring that back here to Providence College.
And for me, the fellowship was an opportunity to grow in service and faith and an awareness of the global community. And I definitely found a family in Solomon Islands. The sisters and all of the Dominicans are wonderful people, and the Solomon Islanders as well. They are honestly the happiest people I've ever met in my life, despite their lack of finances and resources. I really look forward to going back, and it wasn't a one-time trip. I feel such a strong connection there. I miss everyone there already, and watching the video, it makes me so excited but also sad that I can't be there right now. So it was such a wonderful opportunity, and I can't wait for other people to visit the places that we went to and continue that conversation between the American Dominican community and that in the Solomon Islands.
And we just want to say thank you to the Smith Fellowship Committee and all the donors, and Father Rob, Father Pavarnik. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, ladies. Time is running on. We won't have formal time for questions. If anyone wants to ask individual Smith Fellowship students afterwards, please feel free to do so. We have 5 wonderful students that we sent around the world, great ambassadors for Providence College. The reviews from the hosts were absolutely glowing. They went to meet Dominicans and other locations around the world. They undertook Dominican service around the world, and we're very proud of them. We have 37 students who have shown interest in a fellowship next summer. That will obviously shake down before we're done. We hope to send up to 10 fellows somewhere around the world, certainly to some of these locations again, but they're already investigating other ones. We can only do this through the generosity of the alumni of Providence College. We thank everyone for their generosity so far, and you know, it's a joy to make this happen. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.